Sorry my voice sounds like I gargled a bag of rocks and put the results through a wood chipper. Don't feel sick at all, but I was cleaning the house yesterday and might have inhaled a little too much of the stuff I was using on the cabinets. Oops. There seems to be some confusion and infighting in the community regarding the terms Hellene, Hellenistic, Hellenic, and Hellenism. What do all of them mean in the community at large? What do they mean when I use them on the channel? Let's go to Hellas. Let's take a look. Kairete. This week, I received an item on my wish list without a tag letting me know who picked it up, and the person didn't message me in my Discord when I asked, so I suppose I need to thank an anonymous donor for getting me Human Sacrifice in Ancient Greece by Hughes, who examines many assumptions of evidence for supposed human sacrifice in prior scholarship and challenges the assumptions inherent in each. It's already been a fascinating read because, of course, as soon as I opened the package, I had to start diving into it. So thank you so much to whomever donated it. If you, in the audience, decide to pick something up for me off my wish list and wish to get thanked in the future, please make sure that you attach a gift receipt with your display name or the name you want to be thanked by. If it's appropriate, as is the message, I'll read the message at the beginning of the next video I record after receiving it. Thank you again to the anonymous person who picked this one up. From Kaleidoscope, we have practitioners of the divine, Greek priests and religious officials from Homer to Heliodorus. This will help me a lot in my upcoming work on the priestly class and how much of Hellenic religion was practiced in the home versus the temple. It was a lot more hands-on, as you would say. Thank you so much for your support. It means a lot to me. The terms Hellenism, Hellenistic, Hellenic, and Hellenist all come from the Greek word for the people of Greece, which is Hellene. The idea of a unified Greece and unified Greek citizenship, however, is a relatively modern one. Prior to the Trojan War, according to Thucydides, there was some recognition of a similar culture in the sense of sharing gods, but much focus was placed on the citizenship within a particular city-state rather than any idea of a unified Greece as a country or identity. Citizens of other city-states were referred to as resident aliens when dealing with legal code and weren't treated too much differently than outright foreigners during this time. Again, at least legally. The term originated first from a myth found in Hesiod's Catalogue of Women, in which we're informed that Deucalion and Pyrrha, survivors of a gigantic catastrophic flood, had a son named Helen, who was revered as the ancestor of all modern Greek peoples. Well, modern at the time anyway. His kids supposedly sired all the various ancient Greek tribes that later united into city-states through conquering or democracy, and from this, a national identity was tentatively formed. Though it had to do with culture and perceived ancestry, it didn't have a lot to do with religion directly until later. In fact, Hellene became a term of identity itself tied to religion after Paul began writing his letters that were later gathered into the New Testament. He refers to non-Hebrews as Hellenes in Acts and Galatians, similarly to how the Septuagint combined with cultural forces to redefine the term daimon. So, Hellene came under a new definition under Christian influence. It basically meant any pagan living within the boundaries of the then current Greco-Roman civilization, including those practicing faiths other than what we now consider to be Hellenism. Don't worry, I'll get to the infighting over modern definitions soon, but we really do need to take a look at the history to understand where some of this fighting comes from. By the 4th century CE and Emperor Julian's reign, Hellene referred to someone who specifically practiced the ancient pagan traditions in the old way, not simply to those of Greek birth or culture. Julian specifically coined the next term, Hellenismos, from which Hellenism is derived, to describe this ancient religion and distinguish it from Christianity. Later, those who practiced Christianity but were still of Greek descent began referring to themselves as Romaioi, as Hellene picked up a pejorative connotation as Christianity spread throughout the empire, especially following Justinian's decrees in the 6th century barring the practicing of any rites of Hellenismos and destroying the lives and properties of those who just still held on to the ancient ways. By the 12th century, Hellene became an entirely pejorative term that most of Greek descent avoided until the nationalist movements of the 19th century. Most folks still avoided the term outside of these circles and still used the older term Romaioi. Which brings us to the modern day. I've linked an excellent blog post in the description that sums up the history and includes details that I didn't, as well as citations within it to further sources if you'd like to dig into the etymology and cultural evolution of the term and identity. Needless to say, it's meant a lot of things to a lot of different groups over the centuries. Anything in that post that I could get my hands on, I've read through to confirm the account. I normally avoid using tertiary sources, but in this case, it really is one of the best summations I've read so far online of the history and skips over some of the detail found in the secondary sources referenced. Before I get too deep into the modern controversy, I should probably distinguish Hellenic from Hellenistic. This will be important later. Hellenic generally refers to something that is specifically associated with ancient Greece, particularly pre the Hellenistic period. The Hellenic gods, Hellenic pagan, Hellenic polytheism, Hellenic artifacts, etc. It specifically refers to anything prior to the Hellenistic period, though in the modern day, it's also sometimes used to refer to the specific language grouping of ancient and modern Greek dialects, as well as to things that relate to Greek culture. Generally, if I use it, it's in the former, more scholarly sense, specifically to talk about things prior to the Hellenistic period in ancient Greek culture. Hellenistic, on the other hand, refers to a specific era in ancient Greek and Roman history filled with syncretism between Greek, Roman, Egyptian, Semitic traditions and Hindu and Buddhist traditions. During this time, Greek religion and culture spread far and wide and mingled with many other cultures in the Mediterranean region. This period spanned from the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE and is said to have ended around the time of the rise of the Roman Empire in the early 1st century, though I've seen a range of dates online from various sources. If something is referred to as Hellenistic on my channel, I'm usually referred to the syncretic practices and ideas that emerged during this specific period, though I tend to focus on the classical and archaic periods for my own reconstruction. So, someone who practices a syncretic, Kemetic, Roman, and Greek religion and honors deities from each would be a Hellenistic pagan, as opposed to someone who honors the Greek gods in the older way, which would be Hellenic. Both could technically be referred to as Hellenists, or those who practice one of the modern branches of Hellenism. I generally see Hellenism as specifically Hellenic, but because Julian Hellenists practice the syncretized mix of Religio Romana and Hellenism, I recognize that this could technically be exclusionary. Just know that if I'm referring to syncretism on my channel that emerged during that era, I'm likely referring to it as Hellenistic rather than Hellenic. Many modern groups have reclaimed the term Hellene and Hellenismos as religious signifiers for practitioners of the modern reconstructed religions. However, members of the YSCE, also known as the Supreme Council of Ethnikoi Hellenes, as though that's not an immediate dog whistle, and some other groups from Greece and their American branches object to the use of these names by groups and practitioners outside of their circles, claiming that in order to be a Hellene, one must Hellenize, and Hellenization must be defined by ethnic Greeks. I've linked an article from one of them making this, in my opinion, rather fallacious argument. There's a lesser-known definition of Hellenism that specifically refers to all of ancient Greek culture as a whole. However, I've seen it used sparingly and mostly only in older scholarship. Folks from the above-mentioned groups tend to try to strawman this into meaning that all of modern Greek culture falls under Hellenistic and Hellenism, but outside of the YSCE, I've met few Greeks that agree with this definition, so I think it's safe to mostly discard it when our focus is on the religion. We have no proof the ancient Greek religion survived as anything other than syncretic traces in modern Orthodox Christianity, even if Greece is filled with references and monuments from ancient times. The idea that a specific group of modern Greeks should define a term so exclusively is itself ethnic gatekeeping. Full stop. We're all working with the same primary and secondary sources from history, and there isn't some special right or insight for folks that have Greek blood over the rest of us when it comes to a reconstructed tradition. However, because of the rather loud nature of those who like to shout about this sort of thing, sometimes people outside of those organizations see the term Hellenismos as a flag, much the way that some heathens see a satru as a flag, because of the AFA, and let folks from those groups claim the term Hellene and Hellenismos in favor of Hellenism and Hellenist. I tend to take this approach. I refer to what I practice as Hellenism and myself as a Hellenist, and see those groups as practitioners of Hellenismos and let them keep Hellene. You may choose to refer to yourself differently, I won't judge you. As I illustrated earlier, there isn't really a right answer when it comes to reclaimed slurs, much the same as pagan. Which, if you missed it, my video on what and or who pagans are is linked in the iCard above. As for Hellenic, I tend to refer to those who reconstruct ancient Greek religion outside of the YSCE as Hellenists, and those who worship the Greek gods as eclectics or syncretists as Hellenic pagans. Hellenistic pagan I tend to reserve for those who focus their reconstruction on that particular era, though they could also be called Hellenists. From there, you can branch out into the various subgroups modern Hellenists organize themselves into, such as Julian Hellenists, General Hellenists, Orphics, etc. I personally consider Religio Romana and Cultus Deorum to be their own thing and won't refer to either of them as Hellenic outside of when talking about Julian Hellenism. It's a personal preference, but there's such a wide difference in the practices that I do not consider them the same. Anyhow, I hope that cleared things up a little about the fight over these terms we sometimes see in this community. Reclaimed slurs can take on messy connotations, and feel free to use whichever of these terms feels correct to you. I just want to ensure that everyone understands what I mean when I use certain terms in my videos. If you're new here, insult the subscribe button and don't let the like get out unscathed. Drop down into the comments and let me know how you use these terms. Or just tell me that I hate all Greeks because I don't use them the same way you do if that's your speed. Special thanks to GaelicNox for the channel art. As always, links are in the description below to their website and Twitter. And special thanks to my patrons. Without you, the lights wouldn't literally be on in my house right now because my partner lost his job, and because of you, I can afford to fact check things like blog posts and the like if I tap them as tertiary sources. The Patreon bonus video for this month should be up for your enjoyment either right now or fairly soon, and I've likely drawn the next lucky patron who gets to pick a topic. If I haven't yet, you'll be hearing from me soon. As always, I'm excited to see what you guys come up with each month. May the cycle of reciprocity between us ever be positive. And remember, we're stronger together.